Hello, viewers and listeners to CHP Talks. I'm here today with a guest who has international connections, and that is Mr. Vince Vetro. Vince, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Rod.
So for our viewers, I want to tell you a little bit about Vince. Vince and his wife, Ramona, both came to faith in their early 30s. And at the time, Vince was enjoying a career as an entrepreneur with companies in the GTA and in Alberta. Soon after his conversion, Vince felt a deep call to serve the Lord. And after a short-term mission to Ecuador in 1998, that calling was confirmed and Vince became a visionary. Along with some Ecuadorian friends he had made in 1998, Vince started a microfinance charity called the David Jonathan Project, and it's now called the Lending Journey. Since that time, the Lending Journey has provided microloans and training to almost 3,000 women in Ecuador and Nicaragua. And beginning in the fall of 2022, they'll be working in La Paz, Mexico. In 2016, CBC ran a documentary on Vince's work in Latin America called Sisyphus Rides, interesting name. And Vince followed this up with his first book called From the Boardroom to the Barrio. While continuing his career as a businessman, Vince loves serving the lending journey and speaking to groups about the power of microfinancing, its power in changing the lives of impoverished women, and the privilege of sharing his faith along the way. Vince and Ramona live in Erin, Ontario, have 4 adult children, Lauren, Christian, Jonah, and Sophia. So thanks once again, Vince, for joining me this morning. It's exciting. First of all, what is a visionary?
A visionary is a term I heard years ago. It is a businessman who has made his career as a missionary. So they had combined the word businessman and missionary and come up with visionary.
Yeah, well, yeah, I looked twice when I saw the word, and I thought that could be a typo or it could be a word that I'm not familiar with. So, yeah. Thanks. So maybe a little bit about your journey, how you came to Christ. That probably could be a whole program, but just maybe for our listeners and viewers, a little bit about your own story before you got involved in Nicaragua and Ecuador.
Sure. The story to faith, I had grown up in a very, very large Italian family, and parents were immigrants, and so we were very poor. And my dad, and I mean, I understand where it came from, but my dad had always said to us, if you want to be happy, then work for yourself and make lots of money. And so I thought, well, it sounds logical. And so my brothers, we all became independent businessmen. And that was during the 80s. And we became very successful at a very young age. And so by the time I was 31 or 32, I had a staff of about 200 people, and my companies were at 5 companies across Canada, and they were doing really well. And I woke up one morning and I was miserable. And I had to come to grips with the fact I had done really well in business. I made lots of money, had achieved a certain degree of success in my industry. And I just wasn't happy, and I started that search to find, something greater or the truer meaning of life, and then was led to a tiny small country church in Georgetown, Ontario. Okay. And the Lord just really spoke to my wife and I, and we were saved pretty quickly after that, and really began to discover our purpose in life, which was to serve him.
Wow. Okay. And then so you went, you made a trip to South America, and I don't know how that, what the
Yeah.
process was to make that
Yeah,
decision.
so again, funny. I mean, one of the problems of achieving success younger in life is that your arrogance quotient is right off the charts. And so I was a very young, incredibly arrogant young leader, and my church said to me, "Hey, will you take a group of people down to Ecuador on this thing called a short-term mission trip?" And I said, well, if I can manage a staff of 200, I certainly can manage taking a group. And it was an incredible crisis
Okay.
that I experienced down there. I had no concept of the level of poverty and the spiritual warfare, and recognized how incredibly unprepared I was for that task. But as a result of that unpreparedness, I came back to Canada, making sure I would never, ever engage in something overseas where I was not prepared. And so that 1998 trip and on that trip, I had said to the Lord, you open a door, and I'll commit the rest of my life to serving in Latin America. Wow. And I came back, he opened a door, and that was 1998, and still serving down there.
That's awesome. So how did the idea of forming this visionary project come to pass? The microfinancing, the lending journey, what has become the lending journey?
Yeah, well, I was doing some consulting work for the Christian and Missionary Alliance in Ecuador, and I was with a missionary, and we were driving. I think that was maybe 2000. We were driving through the mountains, and we would visit all these small little indigenous country churches, which we could never find the senior pastor of the church. And to which the missionary kept saying to me, they're all out in the fields working because they don't have any money. And I said, well, what if we just started lending people in their congregations money to start little small businesses so that they can support the pastor so he doesn't have to be in the field working? And so we just started lending. I mean, it was literally started lending money out of my pocket. And thankfully I had my own business, so I didn't have to ask for money. It was in those early years, it was all self-financed through my company. We just started lending money to women to start little chicken businesses, little chicken farms. And that's how we began back then. And we gotten to the point where we, during COVID, we lent a couple $20,000 to start a grocery store during COVID. So we've come a long way from the $15, $20 to buy a few chickens and some chicken feed. But really, that's how it began, was trying to find a way to help pastors in these small communities survive.
Right. Well, that's certainly noble. I mean, I have no kind of thought that a pastor necessarily shouldn't be working in the fields, but of course, the work of a pastor, and depending on the size of the congregation, can expand far beyond what you can do. I mean, you each of us have 24 hours in a day, and so if the pastor is unable to perform pastoral duties because of having to be doing something else, I certainly see the value of that.
Right. I mean, the other thing I noticed when we were traveling through the mountains is how hard people work. Like, they just such incredibly hardworking people, and yet they just seem to have such little money. And I understood that, because that's the world I came from. Yeah. My dad worked incredibly hard and made very little money because he didn't speak the English language. Right. And so the idea of entrepreneurship was not a difficult connect to do for me, because, you know, I had come up the same way and done quite well, and thought, why couldn't others who are willing to work hard have that
Sure.
same opportunity?
So how do, okay, there's a woman with this kind of a need, an entrepreneurial spirit, and needing a loan. How do they find out about you, or how do they contact you in Nicaragua, Ecuador?
So, I mean, when we first started off, Rod, as funny as this may sound, we would go into a community once we had the okay of the local leaders, because you always wanted to respect the local leadership of a village. But literally, we would go into a village once we had that, and we would walk into a small restaurant and just say, hey, we're a charity that gives out money for small businesses. And people thought we were crazy.
Yeah.
Like, they just said, who does this? I mean, the stories, Rod, were incredible. And that's really how we started. And then we start giving out loans. And then, and those stories in the early days were incredible. But anyways, that's literally how we would start. And then if you did want a loan, there were a few things you had to commit to. And one was a 26-week training program. And every one of those 26 weeks was based on a Bible verse. So it wasn't long before women were saying, hey, this isn't just about entrepreneurial training. This is a Bible study. And so we had Bible studies going all over Ecuador and Nicaragua. I mean, they're the greatest entrepreneurial principles you'll ever find are in the Bible.
Yeah, well, the Bible has a lot to say about finance and economics and sharing and diligence. Yeah.
Yeah, and managing your money and being risk taking in how you manage your money too. You don't bury it. You don't bury your money in the ground.
Yeah.
So so those were and the number of women who came to faith along the way has been incredible. Rod, I remember one village I was visiting after women had repaid their loans, and they were just talking, they were talking about it. And then one woman stood up and she said, I thought I was getting lessons on how to be an entrepreneur. After this is all over, what I've learned is how to be a better spouse to my husband. Now, I don't know what in those 26 weeks impacted her, but something impacted her to be a better spouse or a more committed spouse. And so as much as it is about the loans, it is just as much about the 26-week teaching. Yeah.
The husbands of these women who are becoming successful entrepreneurs must be just in awe seeing what's happening in their lives.
Oh, absolutely. Now, so probably about 70% of our loans are given to women whose husbands have taken off. And so a lot of the times what we try to do is teach them how to run businesses out of their homes so they can keep an eye on the children. And you sort of stop that cycle of parents who just can't be around because they've got to be out working. Certainly, I mean, that just was a great story about the training side and the impact of the training. I mean, it's sad to say, but a number of women whose husbands have run off, who live in these incredibly impoverished villages, generally end up turning to prostitution because there's no way to feed their children.
Right.
And so one of the things that has really touched our hearts is a number of women that we've been able to help out of prostitution. Wow. Because they've been able now to find a better way to look after their families than doing that. But you would be shocked at the number of women who have no choice but degrade themselves
Mm.
because it's that, or they don't, or their children don't eat.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is so sad, but praise the Lord for the opportunity to come out of that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
of course, it's think about men down there who maybe abandon their families, but of course that's a problem in Canada as well, and in the United States, a huge problem. And I think we are reaping the results of that dissolution of the family here now, with children being raised without both parents in the home, and the same situation, women going out to work and having to leave their kids to fend for themselves sometime.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. In one of the very first stories in my book is about one of the first stories about one of the very first 5 loans we gave out was to a woman named Monica, and she had 4 children. Her husband had taken off, and she had nothing, and she was getting ready to commit suicide, and she was talking about killing her children as well, because she was so despondent about the lifestyle she had gotten into. And a social worker had introduced us to Monica. And everybody in this village said, if you give this woman a loan, you are crazy. You guys have lost your mind. You will never see a penny of that money. And in the book, there's a picture of her first loan and starting her business. And she had started a restaurant. And by her 3rd loan, she had hired women to work in the restaurant.
Wow.
I mean, that's how successful a businesswoman. And I remember the social worker saying to us, like, you guys have no idea what you've done. Like, this was a woman who her whole body image was just, there is no hope. There is no reason to live. And she said, and now you have this owner of a restaurant just running around the restaurant, making sure all her patrons are happy. And
Wow.
like, it just, and my very, very last, one of my very last encounters with Monica, and this is why this story is so pertinent. She said to me, oh, Vince, the kids aren't here to greet you because they're all at church at kids' Bible study.
Oh, yeah.
And it was Monica's way of saying to me, hey, Vince, I finally found my faith.
Yeah. Wow. No. So
Yeah.
this course that they go on in 26 weeks, they commit to, is that sort of the general length of a loan, or how over what they
Exactly.
generally repay the loan within half a year?
Yeah, within 26 weeks. And most of the format that we designed our micro loans around was around information that we received from the United Nations. And so predominantly on a small loan, if you let it go any longer than 6 months, that people they become despondent, because you got to remember, in some of these villages, you don't know whether you're going to be alive today or tomorrow for a number of reasons, right? Just health, security. There's no police, no electricity, no running water, no sewage. Like, yeah, just terrible. So the longer the loan, the scarier it is for them, because they just can't see repaying it.
Yeah.
So the bigger loans go a little longer, but the majority of them. And so every week they come and they make their payment, right? And they make their payment in front of all the other women that they've received loans with. And it's sort of, that developing that sense of camaraderie, that they're all repaying their loans.
Yeah. Do you have a vetting process at all? Like if a woman applies for a loan, is there anything that, I mean, obviously you want her name and all that, but are there any that you have to say no? Or?
Yeah. So yes, I mean, there's a process. They would put a loan application in, and then if they can't read or write, then one of our team would still help them put the loan proposal together, and it's a very simple one, right? And then Now, somebody might apply for a loan for $300, and one of the people doing the interview will say, "Well, listen, here's what we'll do: we'll give you a $50 loan to buy beans, and we'll teach you how to run a small business." Because one of the challenges is somebody comes to you and says, "Okay, I want to buy beans, but I have no money," right? And they'll say, "Okay, we'll just pay next week." Well, if you give all your beans away and everybody's paying next week, and only 30% people show up, you have no business, right?
Yeah.
And it's not even that we wouldn't give them a second loan. It's more, right, because that $50 is an investment. It's not a loss. It's the cost of teaching. And so you just are teaching them practices for collecting, and how much money do you really allow somebody. So if you're selling beans for 50 cents, maybe you say, "Okay, you pay me 25 cents and the 25 cents at the end of the week," but you're getting something. So yeah, so it would all depend. The loan we gave for 20,000, which is the largest loan we've ever done, was from somebody who had repaid multiple loans in different sizes.
Yeah. So there was a trust factor built in already, and
huge trust factor. Yes.
Yeah, and I would challenge anyone in Canada to start a store today with $20,000.
Right, and 20,000 in Latin America, that's a lot of money. $300, because everything's in American dollars, right? So,
right,
$300 a loan when somebody's making $1.25 a day, it's incredible how little money these people are making and how hard they work. So a $300 micro loan is fairly substantial, especially in Nicaragua. Maybe not so much in Ecuador, but
yeah. So you travel occasionally, at least. How often do you go to where these loans are being given out?
Pre-COVID, I would say, at least once every 2-3 months. Once things are running relatively smoothly, you don't have to be down there as often. And especially with Zoom and so many other types of ways of staying in touch. In the early days, I was down there quite a bit. I would say I was down there at least once a month, once every 6 weeks. But we have good leadership team in Ecuador. We have a good leadership team in Nicaragua. We have a great leadership team in Mexico. So I was just in Ecuador. I was just in Ecuador in May, and I'm heading down to Mexico in November to visit 2 communities that were just starting out to give loans. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
So Vince, first of all, our listeners and viewers, I'm sure, are interested in what the process is. Do you do fundraising for your organization? It must take a significant amount of funds to do what you do. And I think you told me that you and many of the people on your staff are actually volunteers.
Yep. Yeah. So nobody on our Canadian staff is paid. I mean, we have to pay the accountant, but other than that, everybody who helps out is a volunteer. I just completed an 1,100-kilometer bike ride from Colombia to Peru through the Andes Mountains as a fundraiser. But we're constantly fundraising, and actually, Rod, right now we're fundraising for the seed money to get Mexico off the ground. So anybody who you would be interested, especially in helping getting Mexico off the ground, because that's a really exciting new venture. They can go to thelendingjourney.com, which is our website, and they can donate to a number of projects, whichever one they would choose. And also on our website, there's sponsorship opportunities. So there's pictures of women who are still waiting for loans, and so they can sponsor a loan that way as well.
So folks who are listening and would like to have a share in this exciting work and helping women come out of poverty in those three countries, can visit thelendingjourney.com, and
Yes.
you'll find opportunities there. So,
yes.
Well, Vince, thank you so much for joining us today. Anything that we haven't covered that should be covered so that people understand the broad scope of what you're doing?
Yeah, and Rod, I appreciate that, because one last thing I would say, we're all pretty familiar with that old adage: you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day; teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. What we have come to sort of make a part of our motto is that there's a third piece to that, and it's that until you sit down and eat the fish with the person, you can't truly gain entry into their lives. And we spend an incredible amount of time sitting and eating the fish with these people. And you really want an opportunity to share your faith. It's not just teaching them to fish for themselves. You got to sit and eat the fish with them and become a part of their family. And that is a huge part of our ministry, is sitting with them and listening to their hardships and their hard stories. And that's where you gain the entry to share your faith, by sitting and listening.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Vince, it's been a real pleasure meeting you and hearing a bit about the lending journey and your journey to what you're doing now. And so God bless you, your wife and family, and your work there. And we'll be looking forward to hearing how things go in Mexico.
Thank you, Rod. Take care.
Thanks. God bless.
Bye.